How do you say, sure, I'll shoot that guy in the back of the head?
If these guys figure out who I am, I'm not long for this earth.
How much does it cost to have someone killed?
I would let them see me buy drugs, buy guns, be involved in beatings.
You were high out of your mind on methamphetamine during that entire evening.
They rode in a very tight pack. The president came up to me and said, keep up, like, don't embarrass me.
Why specifically is it hard for a bureaucracy like law enforcement to go after motorcycle clubs like the Hells Angels?
Once something has been seen, it can never be unseen. You don't want to see it.
Look, I mean, the book starts with you getting shot, so this stuff is dangerous. And I'd love to start with that story because frankly, it sounds like a good reason not to join the ATF in the first place, unless you're the right kind of person.
It actually reinforced my reason to join, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I got hired on a Monday. I didn't have any law enforcement experience. 4 days later, I was a part of a very much remote part of a arrest scenario. As the main team, as the raid team, excuse me, approached the suspect, he took off running. I gave chase from way in the back and ended up catching up, and the suspect disappeared into his neighborhood. It was a pretty rough neighborhood and had just vanished. And in the search for him, he was hiding, and I ended up getting isolated. And he popped up and had a gun on me, put the gun to my head, was holding me hostage, walked me towards one of our vehicles, one of the law enforcement vehicles that was there on scene, and was intending to use that as his escape with me driving.
Wow.
Pushed me in the front seat, was behind me with the gun held to my head. The other agents, now realizing what happened, began to surround the car. And he's screaming at me to drive, to get him out of there, to help him make his escape. And like I said, I didn't have any experience, but I knew better than to drive off with this guy holding a gun to my head.
Right.
I knew that there was a bad end game to this scenario. I wanted that end game to take place while I had some partners around versus 20 miles down the road, kneeling in some ditch being executed by this guy.
Right.
So my initial plan, there was a telephone pole, probably 30 yards in front of us. And I was like, I'm going to run us into this telephone pole as hard as I can, as fast as I can get this car going. I'm going to hit this telephone pole. And I went to turn the ignition, and then plan B hit my brain. And I pulled the keys out of the ignition and dropped them to the floorboard. and I told him, I said, dude, smart. I dropped the keys. And as I leaned forward to grab the keys, the gun rolled off my head, and he ended up pressing it into my back. And then my partners that were surrounding the vehicle, they lit him up from every direction, both the passenger side window, the driver's side window, the rear view, or the rear window. And they ventilated this dude, man. It was a 5 or 10 second lead and glass storm.
Wow.
Like you would see in a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah.
It was that's what it was like. And in the process, the suspect shot me in the back. The bullet, it went in my back. It went through my lung. It narrowly missed my heart. It exited the left side of my chest. And 4 days on the job, like I'm bleeding to death in this trailer park, like with blood coming out of my chest, like you're holding your thumb over the end of a garden hose. This giant pool of blood was growing around me. This crinkled up old used bag of potato chips like blew through it and blew past. And I was like, man, like I haven't even gotten a paycheck yet and I'm dying.
Right. Like you can't even log into whatever. You haven't gotten your key card.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. So that's a hell of a first week on the job. I mean, you're still here, so you survived that clearly. I'm guessing he didn't.
He didn't make it. He was the agents after the shooting takes place. He was in the backseat of this car. Pull him out of the backseat. It was a 2-door Monte Carlo, and pushed me into the backseat where he was at, like to make the trip or try to find a hospital, try to find some help. We were in a pretty remote area. But the truth of it is, after having survived that, one of the very best things, maybe the best thing that ever happened to me on the job was that event.
Why?
It taught me like how quickly things can go bad, how quickly things get violent. I wasn't brought up like that. I was brought up like in the Happy Days, Richie Cunningham, white picket fence, both parents together, family. So to learn the law enforcement game, I had to learn it on the job. I wasn't born into that kind of life. And so the doors that opened, the contacts it created, in a weird way, the credibility it created, because I couldn't wait to come back to work. I think everybody was waiting for me to retire, to resign, to use that as an excuse to get out. It was my excuse to try again and see if I could get it right.
Yeah, I suppose all the dumb rookie jokes probably stop if you've gotten shot during an arrest, even if it was your first week, right?
Oh, trust me, I still got them. I still get them. Dude, you're the guy who got shot 4 days on the job? You're that guy?
How'd you manage that? Yeah.
I still get them, but I deserve them. I earned it. To be mocked and to be made fun of, especially having survived it and hopefully survived it. I tried to survive it with a good, positive attitude, always looking forward and trying to take a bad situation. Man, this is life. Trying to take a bad situation and make something out of it. I truly believe life is 10% of what happens to us and 90% how we react to it.
Sure. I'm guessing you were married at this point, right? Already?
I was. Yeah.
So did your wife think like, oh, okay, he's going to resign and become a science teacher now?
100%. And that was when I was confronted with that, like, okay, well, what are you going to do now? And I'm like, well, what I'm going to do now is try to recover, try to heal, and go back to work and see if I can do this right.
I'm guessing that wasn't the answer she was hoping to hear.
No, that didn't go over real well.
Oof. Yeah. So you ended up being, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. Did getting shot so early in your career, did that change how you approached the job afterward?
Yeah, it did. So prior to being involved in law enforcement, I was an athlete. I played college football. I had a very successful college football career, but it wasn't because I was an amazing athlete or a great performer. I was constantly surrounded by people who were bigger, stronger, faster, more athletic than me. The way I was able to compete as an athlete was to outwork my competition and play the game as recklessly as I could play it.
Okay.
That translated to law enforcement. Outwork the competition, outwork your peers, and be reckless about how you approach the job. I'm not sure that that's the advice that I would give to a young officer, like quote unquote, be reckless about it. But I am who I am. The tiger doesn't change his stripes, man. That's what my personality was. That was my character trait. And so I just applied that to now, coming off a football field, to a law enforcement career.
How did you end up becoming an undercover? I assume you have to lean in to do that, right? Because it's a 24/7 kind of version of the job.
Absolutely. At least I was an ATF agent, and with ATF, they do a pretty good job of kind of letting you find your own way. And undercover work is truly nothing more than a tool in an investigator's toolbox. There's dozens, if not hundreds of ways to investigate a case. Undercover work is one of those ways, but it's where my interests lied. I didn't know if I would be any good at it. I didn't know if I would find any success, but I wanted to try. That's actually why I came to ATF, because the ATF undercover program and historically our operatives were the king of the mountain. They were some of the legendary figures in law enforcement. I've always said, if you're a baseball player and you play shortstop, you want to play for the New York Yankees. You want to be Derek Jeter. As an undercover agent, like if you wanted to play with the big boys, you wanted to be an undercover agent in ATF's program.
Why do we have this is probably a dumb question, but why do we have a separate bureau for alcohol, tobacco, and firearms specifically? Is that a prohibition thing? Because it seems like can't the FBI handle that? Like, I don't understand why those things are separate.
I think in today's world and in today's political world, that's the debate. Like, why do we need ATF? ATF grew from prohibition, the Eliot Ness quote unquote untouchables stories. As they were investigating prohibition, illegal liquor and liquor trafficking, those gangsters in the 30s used guns, machine guns, Tommy guns, Thompson machine guns, which led to some of the gun laws. When a still was discovered out in the wilderness, it was nearly impossible to dismantle that and bring it back to civilization. So they blow them up.
I see. So
ATF kind of naturally inherited the firearms laws, naturally inherited the explosives laws. Then in 1968, the Gun Control Act is put in place, which elevated the gun laws after Dr. King was assassinated, after Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, which led to the Gun Control Act that enhanced regulation of firearms. And so ATF didn't actually become its own bureau until historically, I believe, like 1972. It's not an old agency, and it's not a big agency. There's probably more FBI agents in New York City than there are ATF agents across the country.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't even know. They maybe have heard of it, and internationally, people have no idea what it is generally. But everyone's heard of the FBI because it's in movies. ATF is, if it's in the movies, it's like there's a guy from the ATF who's like a weird foil character for somebody else, right? Like The Rock or whatever shows up in Fast and Furious. I don't even know if that's part of it. But yeah, it's rare. You guys don't get a lot of front page media.
I'll tell you, like, kind of a funny backstory that plays into that is that there was a Tony Scott movie years ago titled Deja Vu that starred Denzel Washington. That story originally, Denzel is an FBI agent and he is investigating this bombing of a tour boat, which kind of leads to like this big, massive destruction. There's some ATF people that consulted on that film and said, this would be much more authentic if this was an ATF agent investigating this crime. It fits ATF's jurisdiction. And Tony Scott flipped that character from an FBI agent to an ATF agent, and people were like, oh, what are you doing? Like, no one knows who these guys are. But Tony was big on authenticity and being accurate and trying to be historically accurate. And so I'm agreeing with your point. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of people know who ATF is. Ultimately, ATF, because of the gun laws, because of the arson laws, we have some narcotics jurisdiction. Ultimately, ATF became the equivalent of the federal violent crime police, mm-hmm. Which led to our ability to investigate like narcotics robberies, home invasion crews, murder for hire cases, those types of cases that have a gun or bomb element to them that give us jurisdiction. And then we became very good at investigating those types of crimes.
Going back to your undercover, well, actually going down to your undercover skill set, this seems like almost like the ATF's bread and butter, at least according to some of the books, or maybe these books are just focused on undercover operations, and maybe that's why it seems like that. But you mentioned earlier, if you want to do undercover, you want to be in the ATF. Why are undercover operations so popular? Is not quite the right word, prolific maybe, and why is this one of the main things that the ATF does? Is it because organized crime is usually associated with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and that's what you need in order to break these rings up?
Well, I think that our jurisdiction lent itself to undercover work in a lot of ways. Firearms jurisdiction, explosives jurisdiction. We overlapped into the narcotics world. But like, why has ATF gained notoriety or become prolific at undercover work? It's because that program was supported and encouraged. And then there's a unique, ATF, when I came on the job, I got hired in 1987. The other federal agencies were looking for very specialized skill sets in the people that they hired. Like the FBI, for example, was looking for people with legal backgrounds, accounting backgrounds, chemistry backgrounds, all those kinds of things. ATF was hiring street cops. ATF was recruiting from police departments, state and local police departments. So they were hiring agents, new agents that understood the process of investigating a case and how to work informants and how to develop information and all those things. So the core of ATF's agent cadre were like true criminal investigators who wanted to get down in the weeds. They wanted to get dirt underneath their fingernails. They weren't specialists. And then you take that with some of the people that came on with that courageous mindset of saying, not only let me investigate this case, let me insert myself. Let me put myself in the middle of a crime event. And now I'm biased to the undercover technique, and I'm biased to it because that's what I did for 27 years. But my bias is based in there's really no better way to investigate a case, because you're taking a living, breathing, trained law enforcement officer, inserting him into a crime scheme or a crime event or a crime group, and then that person is reporting back out real time to a case agent, a handler, ultimately to a jury and to a judge and to prosecutors, what he or she saw and smelled and touched and heard. And so it's the ability to present a case becomes overwhelmingly favorable in behind an undercover investigation. It's not based on a wiretap and trying to decipher what you think you heard, or a surveillance, or recovered evidence, or a historical investigation. You're right in the middle of it.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you gain the criminal's trust when that's got to be the tricky isn't even quite the word, right? I mean, you show up, you got to be friends with somebody, get sort of, initiated into this thing. And then I don't think you don't just knock on the door of the Hells Angels and say hey, I'd love to traffic some of those drugs you guys keep running back and forth across the country. That's not going to fly, right? So where do you begin?
No, Jordan, that's the trick, and that's where the skill set and the character and the personality of the ones that do it, that are successful, truly comes out. Is that you don't not only the Hells Angels, any criminal organization, any unit that has spent time together, there's loyalty there. And those groups are inherently paranoid, and they're paranoid for a reason. That paranoia keeps them out of prison. They're traditionally untrusting groups of people. So how do you build that trust? For me, I was a salesman. That's the way I looked at my job. I was a salesman. My product was me. So I had to figure out, what are my suspects looking for? What do they value? And can I craft a false persona that fits that allows me to approach them, spend time with them, ultimately gain trust. When you gain trust, you build loyalty. Sometimes you build love in some cases when you have enough time to spend with someone, but you do it with the known intention that ultimately you're going to betray all those things. And so it's the human factor is weird in it. It's strange in it. It's odd because God didn't build us that way. To intentionally build someone's trust and love and loyalty with the opening intent, I'm going to betray this at some point. That it's unnatural.
Yeah, that's interesting. You've got to bury that, right? Because if you kind of go into it thinking like, I got to keep these guys at arm's length because eventually I'm going to throw them all in prison, you're tying a weight around your leg.
Well, and you're so as you're building trust and trying to build credibility in the eyes of the suspects, like for me, I had to constantly remind myself that this character I'm portraying, this false persona that I've inherited, if they find out the truth, like they're not going to ask me not to come around. I'm going to get a straight razor drag across my throat or a baseball bat on the back of my head. That's going to be the reaction to it.
Right. So you basically have to keep that fear of they're going to murder me if they figure out that this is BS. So, and that outweighs whatever other psychological protections you're maybe subconsciously running in your head.
Well, I'm jumping ahead here a bit in the story,
okay.
But we've already mentioned the Hells Angels, so I'll use them as the example. As I was researching the Hells Angels, and when I was asked to participate and lead that undercover operation, like I wasn't a biker investigator. There were dozens of agents that I felt would have served that role better than I did. But knowledge is power for law enforcement. The more we know about whatever our suspect or crime scene is, the better we're able to investigate it. So in doing my research in the Hells Angels, trying to figure out who's who in the zoo, like who exactly am I dealing with? I learned all those obvious public things that are easy to find out, that they're classified as an organized or an international organized crime syndicate, 5,000 members, 500 charters. They're in 60 different countries. They're all over the world. But the one thing that kept jumping out at me is that they're willing to kill their own. They had a historical track record of murdering their own members if they felt betrayed or compromised. And so that was always in the back of my head. Like, these dudes will kill you.
Yeah. God, these guys, I mean, the Hells Angels especially, it's just like, it's an understatement to say they're a rough bunch, but there's a reason. So tell us what one percenters are, right? Because I think this kind of goes to it, right? They're proud of being these one percenters. Tell us what this means.
And that's a term that's used in the outlaw biker community, which says that we are the 1% of this world that are outlaws, that are criminals, and they're proud of it. They advertise it. They're not shy about it. It's a badge of honor for them. There's millions and millions of people out there that ride motorcycles and that ride motorcycles in groups and for all that the joy of it, the brotherhood of it, or sisterhood of it. Like not just the Hells Angels, but like all these outlaw motorcycle gangs truly pride themselves in being that 1% that is outside the law. And that's, like in the Hells Angels world, they portray themselves publicly as being like these fun-loving rascals who like have this common love of riding motorcycles together. They just don't want to live by society's rules and society's laws. They want the freedom to do and go and be who they want to be, which there's not many people that will argue with that mentality on the surface. But when you see behind the curtain, they have pages and pages, volumes, almost books worth of rules and policies and procedures and protocols that you have to live by to exist in that gang, far beyond what any of us as a common citizen or common man have to live by.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subculture that someone normal would not want to be a part of this. I mean, in the book you discuss you're hanging around these guys before you go undercover or try to even get in the gang. You're hanging around and guys are asking you for favors like, "Hey, can you kill this guy for money?" And you can't be like, "No, I don't do that sort of thing," right? So you have to say yes, but then you can't actually do it because You're a cop. So how does all this work, right? How do you say, sure, I'll shoot that guy in the back of the head for $1,200 or 20,000, whatever it is, but then not actually do it, but somehow that still builds your credibility. They don't think you chickened out. How does that?
Well,
how do you do this? Something like that.
For me and for my career, which like everybody's got their own approach and their own techniques and their own styles and strategies. It's very individual. And I'll preface it by saying this. I was never the best undercover agent out there. I've never said that publicly or privately. There's dozens of people that I admire who I think were better, believe were better at the job than I was. What I was good at was creating what we call street theater. And street theater is inaccurate conclusions based on accurate observations. So I would accurately let suspects see me in crime events. I would let them see me buy drugs, buy guns, be involved in beatings, doing debt collections, selling stolen vehicles, whatever you name it. I could create that scenario. What they didn't know, the inaccurate part of it, is those scenarios were staffed and manned and acted out by other undercover operators. They were skits. They were hoaxes. So, Jordan, if you're my suspect, and you see me buy machine guns and pay for machine guns or receive machine guns, and you're there and I put them in the trunk of my car and you're handling them, you've just witnessed what you believe to be machine gun trafficking, firearms trafficking. That's way better than me telling you some story about what I do.
Right.
Telling you some lie. I've involved you in it. I paid you. I gave you some cash for watching my back on a debt collection. Mm-hmm. And now you tell your friends, hey, you know what, this guy, what he says, he's legit. I was there. I experienced it.
Meanwhile, you bought the guns from a cop, from an ATF agent who seized them from somebody else 3 months ago.
From another undercover who had a script. Like it's almost like a play or a movie. Like almost knowing like what the dialogue is going to be, let alone like what their actions and what marks they have to hit. It was very much like a play or a film.
So do you sit in an office and meet up with the other guy and go, okay, you're going to bring this and we got to get the judge to sign off on that. You got to get the boss to sign off on this. And you say, hey, aren't you the guy that killed Tony? And then I say, yeah, what's it to you? And then we do this gun transaction. Like you're sitting there discussing this, right? And drinking coffee and then you do it the next week. How do you plan something like this?
For me personally, I had the equivalent of a playbook that I could put into play that had some like loose scripts that we could use. And it was almost like, hey, look, today we're going to do a debt collection. Everybody turn to page 17 of our playbook. Right. These are the roles we need filled. This is how we're going to portray it. This is how it's going to look to the suspect that we introduce into this debt collection. This is the vibe we want to create for this guy. And so, like for me, by the time the Hells Angels case arrived, by the time that opportunity was presented to me, I had already had 15 years of undercover experience behind me. I'd bought guns, hundreds of times, from, street guns, from pea shooters, handguns, to shoulder-launched rockets.
Wow.
I'd bought bombs from PVC homemade pipe bombs to servo-activated remote control C4 devices. I'd bought dope, from dime bags and 8 balls to cartel-level dope. I'd been involved in home invasion, infiltrating home invasion crews and schemes, portraying myself as a contract killer in murder-for-hire cases. So I never considered myself an expert in anything, but I had spent 15 years building and developing the tradecraft of undercover work. And so when that opportunity was presented, like I was pretty confident, even though I was entering a world that I probably didn't fully understand, that I could sell them that I was a gangster.
Who's selling shoulder-fired rockets in the United States that you bought?
You know what? You'd be shocked.
Really?
You'd be shocked. We did a case where a home invasion crew, that they were doing narcotics robberies. They wanted an RPG for use in their scheme. And so like, hey, this is what you're looking for. Guess what? I know where to get one. I can find one. I know what the black market is. So it sounds outrageous.
It does.
It sounds crazy, but it's all crazy. Every bit of it. When someone's hiring you and saying like, and going to play God with someone's life, and someone approaches me and says, hey, I want to hire you to go kill Jordan. Okay, like I can do that. And then I approach Jordan and say, dude, today's your lucky day. Someone wants you killed.
Right.
Well, how am I lucky? Well, they've involved the cops. They've involved the police. So if you will cooperate with me, if you will play your part in this scheme, you are going to help me catch the person that is contracted to have you murdered.
Right. So I vanished for a couple of months, right? Because you killed me. Is that how it works?
And even before that, I'm going to take you and I'm going to use makeup and Hollywood theatrics, and I'm going to take pictures and videos of you being murdered. And then I'm going to take those pictures back to the suspect as evidence, as proof that you're dead. So play along. I never crossed paths with anybody who said, man, I'm not willing to play. I'm not willing to help you find and capture and investigate and charge and prosecute and convict the person that has hired someone to murder me.
Yeah, it seems like that's a pretty easy decision. I'm sorry I'm stuck on this. Why does a home invasion crew need an RPG? What good could that possibly do? If you're breaking into someone's home, even if you're stealing drugs, why do you want a grenade launcher? That just seems like the loudest, least covert thing that you could use.
Well, and these crews were building and selling and buying explosive devices as well. It's such an intimidating tool. A bomb is such an intimidating tool. It's so indiscriminate. If you have a gun and you point it at someone, plus or minus, you're going to be at least close to your intended target.
Right.
A bomb is indiscriminate. That's intimidating. Just to find a bomb. If you found a bomb on your car, like that in itself, and the indiscriminate nature of it, and what your imagination of what that could have created is massively, massively intimidating.
I see. So it's almost for show, because I'm imagining this home invasion crew is not blowing someone's door off with an RPG. That's insane.
No, but you also look at like how the cartels conduct their business. I mean, they're shooting RPGs, they're shooting rockets at each other, and
that's true.
And some very exotic weaponry is being used. And if you're on the other side of that battle, and you know, hey, these guys got shoulder-launched rockets, and you're going to think twice before you jump into that fight.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so how much does it cost to have someone killed? Like if I'm for real, you know, I'm not really asking you for I'm not obviously going to do this, but I'm curious what someone says, hey, go kill Jordan. Are you like, it's $1,500 or is it $15,000 or is it $150,000? Like, what is the price range of a murder for hire? I have no idea.
That's a great question. And it's all of the above. There's no like bottom line to do it. It is the solicitor's interest and willingness to participate in the scheme. If someone says, I'm going to give you $1,000 to go kill this guy, mm-hmm. as an undercover, or just as a hitman, you could say, you know what, I ain't doing it for $1,000.
Right.
It's 10 times that. It's $10,000. Well, if I'm being solicited to commit a murder and I decline the solicitors, if I blow through what they can financially afford, like how do I now walk away from you knowing that you want someone killed, and like now I'm just going to walk away from it because we can't agree on the price?
Yeah, now you're a liability, right? So you basically have to agree to it.
And civilly liable. I was involved in a home invasion investigation. I'm leaving a meeting. I'm at a Waffle House parking lot, and I'm leaving a meeting with an armful of pipe bombs from this kid, not a kid, a young man. And as I'm leaving, he says to me, hey, I need some help tightening somebody up tonight, man. Are you willing to come with me? Are you like, I need some backup, right? Like I've accomplished my mission. I have a handful of pipe bombs that I just purchased from him. I wasn't interested in being involved in like whatever his personal life dispute was.
Sure.
Right. So I declined that. That night he goes out and commits a murder. He kills the guy.
Oh,
like
gosh.
I wasn't fully understanding what he was asking me to participate in.
Mm-hmm.
I was sued civilly. Me and my partner were sued civilly by the murder victim's family, saying that we should have known, we should have anticipated what this guy intended. There was no indications that he was going to become that violent or that's what his intent were. Now, the civil suit was ultimately dismissed, and it was partly dismissed by testimony saying, like, do you think, knowing what I do for a living, that if I thought this guy wanted assistance in a murder, that I would have stepped away from that and just stood back and let him commit that without intervening? I would not have done that. I didn't understand what his intentions were. But nonetheless, once you become involved in a murder for hire case, everything else comes to a stop. That, like, it's almost like the hands on the clock stop moving, because everything in your personal life, in your professional life, now has to be put on hold because you have to see this through. If I've been solicited to commit a murder and I'm not quick enough or I'm not good enough at what I'm doing, and the solicitor goes outside of me, and what happens if he crosses paths with a real hitman?
Yeah.
Who's really going to do it?
Right.
So you can't take the risk.
Right. So you have to put everything on hold and go fake murder somebody, because if they need him killed fast and they do it because you were too slow, or tomorrow was your day off, then that person's dead and it's kind of your fault.
You can't drag your feet because you have to be proactive now, because waiting is dangerous.
Yeah. So you're involved in some of these like home invasion crew stuff. Robbing a normal person would be just a weirdly distressing event. But robbing, maybe I just don't have a good idea of what this is all about, and maybe I'm naive. But it seems like it would be weirdly thrilling to go in with a group of criminals and rob a drug dealer, because you're not robbing somebody who's like a hardworking person. You're not robbing a normal person whose kids, you're trashing their kids' rooms. You're robbing a drug dealer, so it's kind of like, this guy's. I'm with scumbags robbing a scumbag. Is there an element of kind of like, this is interesting? You're not going to get in trouble for it, right? It's part of your job. You're getting paid.
Well, if there were suspects involved as a narcotics robbery crew, a home invasion crew, I had a common theme, a common line that I used universally in those cases. And I would always tell the suspects, I'm not looking for robbers who are willing to murder. I'm looking for murderers who are willing to rob. That is the mentality I need. Because exactly as you said, someone has either a stash of cash or like a big load of narcotics that I'm going to bring your crew, your robbery crew, in to help me steal. And it was simple. I would say, like, look, this isn't going to be easy work. We're not snatching grandma's purse off her shoulder and running down the alley.
Right.
These dudes are going to be armed up. They're guarding their product. Like, you have to be ready to go to war to do this, to participate in this. And then when these crews show up with guns and ski masks and rubber gloves and bulletproof vests, their intention is clear.
Yeah, it's a good conspiracy charge. As a prosecutor,
they know what they're getting into.
Right.
I made it a point to make sure that they knew what they were getting into. And if someone didn't have the balls for it, if this is not what you do, back out now. Mm-hmm. Get out now, because this could get nasty.
Yeah, I would imagine prosecutors love this, right? Because when they go, oh, I thought we were just going to go in and steal the television. It's like, so you brought automatic weapons, explosives, body armor, and 15 dudes to go steal televisions out of this person's house? I don't think so. Oh, and we have you on tape talking about robbing this kilo, the kilos of cocaine that this guy stashed in a safe under the floor.
If I've built my case properly and professionally, if you're the defendant in that case, how do you decide that you're going to go into a courtroom and try to, like exactly what you just said,
Yeah.
try to convince a jury and a judge that that wasn't your intention? When I've laid out the scheme to you and it's all audio and video recorded, and you show up with tools of the trade to commit an armed robbery, like good luck talking yourself through that one. Good luck convincing a jury that that wasn't your intention.
Right. No, that at that point, your defense is these other guys made me do it and I feared for my life and I couldn't say no or whatever. And you plead it out.
Which is the unasked question, but is one of the problems is entrapment. As an undercover agent, officer, you always have entrapment in the back of your mind. You can't create a scheme that is so wildly attractive to someone that a common person couldn't say no to it. You can't make it so lucrative, so easy, so glamorous that someone who's, like, for example, down on their luck, saying like, look, I don't want to do this. I haven't done this before, but I have to take this risk. You can't entrap people into those crimes. They have to, part of building the case is showing and proving through their own words and actions that they are predisposed to do this. They've done it before.
Right. Entrapment. Let me see here. I'm going to look up the standards because it's been a while since law school, but it's basically when a law enforcement official or their agent, so somebody who's working with you like an informant, induces a person to commit a crime that they otherwise would not have committed. So, government inducement, coercion, extraordinary promises, and like you said, lack of predisposition. So the defendant was not already inclined or prepared to commit the crime before law enforcement's involvement. And there are other tests depending on the state, like what you say to the person. Like if you come to me and you say, let's go rob a drug dealer, and I say, no way. And you say, come on, man, there's no one there. I know that your mom has cancer and you have no income. And all you have to do is help me carry the stuff. And I trust you. You don't even have to carry a gun. If I go do that, that might rise to the standard of, and if you don't do it, I have to kill you because you know about this operation. That's likely entrapment. But if you come to me and you say, let's go rob a drug dealer, and I say, great, that's my favorite hobby. Let's shoot them while we go in there too, because I hate these guys in the way that they look, and and split the money with me. That's not likely entrapment, right?
If I'm out there convincing people to commit crimes that they haven't done, they're not predisposed to do, not willing to do, shame on me.
Right.
And that's bad policing. If I'm not any better at it than that, then I shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
Right. Basically, entrapment is, are you making criminals out of people that wouldn't otherwise commit those particular crimes?
Well, and so entrapment is always, in the back of your mind, avoiding it, overcoming entrapment, making sure that we're not creating criminals. We don't have to create criminals. There's plenty of them out there. Another element is outrageous government conduct, whereas an agent of the government, you're so outrageous in your character, you're so outrageous in your role that you overwhelm the suspect. Those are the two most common defenses that we face. My client was entrapped. You lured him into something that he wasn't willing to do. Or you and your character were so over the top that my client was intimidated or afraid to say no.
Right. That's tough. That's got to be tough, right? Because you have to argue that you are convincing and really good at your job as a hitman. And then on the other hand, you also have to argue, but this person wouldn't have been afraid of me. Why? You kill people for money. Like, why wouldn't he be afraid of you? Right. So that's a decent defense. I would imagine that's effective.
Yeah. And there's always problems to overcome. Like people in life, regardless of what you do for a living, regardless of who you are, not only what you do for a living, the greatest achievers in life are problem solvers. I don't care if you're operating on someone's brain, if you're flying the space shuttle, if you're an undercover agent, if you're running a business, if you're running a family. Every day we're confronted with problems. The people that achieve are the ones that are great at solving and handling problems.
You had some pretty convincing I don't know what you call it, backstopping. You had all this crap in your house, so it would look like you were going to go down in a shootout with the police if it came down to it. Tell us about that, because it sounds like you basically had some crazy prepper-looking stash and a bunch of booze.
Well, in essence, it was part of an earlier element to our conversation of street theater, inaccurate conclusions from accurate observations. So in my undercover house, I had bulletproof vests. They were laying around. I carried a baseball bat with me all the time. I didn't really talk about it. It was just a prop that I used, that I held on to. I had a plumber's wrench hanging on a nail at the door of my house. So like at the front door of my house, there's a nail in the wall and there's a pipe wrench hanging there. Well, all those things, I didn't have to speak to those things. Like when you come to someone's house, if you came to my house to socialize or to visit me or see me or come to a party and you see bulletproof vests laying around, like you're going to form in your own mind a conclusion as to what that means. If you're dealing with me and I'm like portraying myself in this gangster role and I'm swinging a baseball bat around with me, that's so uncommon. It's so unusual. You're going to decide for yourself what that means. If you came to my house and you see a plumber's wrench hanging at the back door, I don't have to say a word about it. Your automatic conclusion is going to be, well, if someone rings his doorbell at 3 o'clock in the morning and he doesn't have a gun in his hand, before he opens that door, he can grab that plumber's wrench off that nail and have a weapon in his hand. Those were all elements of the street theater, the inaccurate conclusions from accurate observations, that all the totality of those things, starting with those little tiny things, led to credibility.
That makes sense, right? People fill in the blanks. There's this, I used to talk about this when I talked about dating, but it was like, if you tell somebody something, it's like, let's say it's a level 1 credibility, right? Like, okay, he says this about himself. It may be true. It may not be true. If they hear about it from one of your friends, that's more credible because it's not coming from you, but it's still coming from one of your friends. So like maybe there's a 20%, 30% level of doubt. But if they think they figured it out on their own without anybody saying anything, that's almost 100% level of credibility, right? And people think like, oh, I know this because of my observational skills. And what they don't know is that you are manipulating their observational skills.
Jordan, if I tell you that I'm a debt collector and I give you glamorous historical stories of debt collections that I've been a part of.
Yeah, you're bragging.
That's, you're going to put your own level of value on those. But if you're standing at my shoulder and I do a debt collection, and I've paid you to be there to watch my back, and then we get done, and I take some of that money that I just collected and put it in your pocket, I would historically tell people, hey, you just participate in this. You saw behind the curtain. You saw what I'm about. Do not open your mouth.
Right.
Do not put my business out on the street. They can't help themselves. They had to tell other people. I was there. I saw it. I touched it. I witnessed it. I participated in it. And then all those things start to come true. All those things you previously mentioned start to come true.
How did you end up in a motorcycle? From what I understand from the book, you don't even like motorcycles that much from what I read. So how did it end up that you are the guy who gets picked to infiltrate the Hells Angels? How did that happen?
The Hells Angels in Arizona were operating violently and with impunity. No one was really checking them. And so I was approached by a case agent, an ATF agent named Joe Slatella. Absolutely the most dynamic, fabulous, major complex case investigator that I ever crossed paths with. The guy's brilliant. He's a savant. He's one of those guys who had the ability to like assess and hold and process like vast amounts of intelligence and information and reference it instantly, mentally. He was a savage of an investigator. So Joe wants to take a run at the Hells Angels, and he approaches me. We are friends. We were peers. I love Joe. I respected him. We'd worked together in the past. And he says, I want you to lead this undercover investigation, and we're going to get side by side. not infiltrate the Hells Angels. We're going to try to get side by side with the Hells Angels. My first reaction was like I said earlier, I'm not the right guy. I can name a dozen guys who will fill the role that you need served in this case better than I can. Guys who have studied this world, this culture, who are comfortable with it, who are familiar with it. He said, you know what, here's why I want you to lead this, is you have a head start. I'd already been working a case that had been based in Bullhead City, Arizona, which was right across the Colorado River from Laughlin, Nevada. I had been working a case on some bounty hunters that were getting out of hand. They were like beating people. They were taking like murder for hire contracts. They were like, they were way off the rails. In this bounty hunter investigation, I had already started crossing paths with members of the Hells Angels, not as targets, just in the criminal community, in that society. He's like, dude, you got a head start. You always figure it out. You'll figure this out. You'll figure out how to play the game, but you got a head start. They already know who you are. Right. We don't have to start from scratch. And so, you know, I jumped in, and my mentality on this job was always dangerous boys go to dangerous places. Like the ATF didn't hire me to sit at a desk and like do a computer investigation. They hired me to get out and like I said earlier, get in the weeds and get down and dirty. And so, you know, I'll say this, like we never accomplish anything in the world of law enforcement alone. We had a fully staffed task force. We had every job and every element of an investigation covered by professionals who were experts at whatever it is that their assignment was. So in the end of an investigation, any investigation, there's typically someone left who either gets the credit, sometimes takes the blame, but there's someone left on the point who ends up, you know, when something gets publicity, speaking about it. That happened to be me in this Hells Angels infiltration. But like I had dozens of people around me who made every bit the sacrifice and suffered and put the amount of time and blood, sweat, and tears into the case that I did.
So, okay, so at first you're posing as, is it fair to say a petty criminal, or maybe not a petty criminal, but just a regular criminal at this point? You're not like, hey, want to join your gang? It was just like, hey, I want to do criminal activity for money around you.
What I was known as was a gun runner, a debt collector, ultimately like a quasi kind of unprofessional hitman. And so that my cover story wasn't one that I invented or just used for the Hells Angels case. It had been one that I had developed and perfected over years and years and years of undercover operations, and I just recycled it. I had become comfortable in playing that character. I had become comfortable in being Jaybird Davis, the gun runner. I could talk about the nuances and the tradecraft of firearms trafficking, explosives trafficking. I could talk about debt collections with a level of expertise, having studied it, having talked to people that did it for real, defendants, criminals, suspects. So when I presented that persona, I was presenting it with a high level of confidence.
Right. High level of authority as well. Yeah. Why specifically is it hard for a bureaucracy like law enforcement to go after motorcycle clubs like the Hells Angels? It seems like it seemed from the book, it seemed like it was just not that law enforcement isn't up to the challenge, but it's almost like a design flaw. It's like it's more fashionable maybe to go after one or two big volume drug dealers or gun dealers, or if you want to make a ton of cases, you just go after small timers and you just rack them up, one guy per week. But going after a big organization seems really difficult. Takes too much time and resources, and then maybe a questionable result.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I've got at least the perfect answer for it. The outlaw motorcycle gangs, to some extent, operate in obscurity. It's not like we see them every day. When we see them, they allow themselves to be seen. They advertise who they are with the cuts, with the vests they wear. They're advertising their membership. Like typically, and I'm going to speak to the Hells Angels because like I can't speak in this big picture that encompasses all motorcycle gangs. Mm-hmm. With the Hells Angels, if you're not crossing business with them, if you're not involved in the operations of their gang, like many times they're typically not hard to get along with. It's not like these guys wake up in the morning and say like, who are we going to go beat up today? They do what they do. If you cross paths with them and then get sideways with them, you know, they're some of the baddest cats on the planet. But like, I didn't find them to be getting up in the morning and pouring themselves a bowl of Cheerios and then saying like, who am I going to beat up today? Who am I going to shoot today? Who am I going to rob today? Those things that I was involved in were all elements that were part of their lifestyle well before I ever arrived on the scene.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book that a small number of outlaw bikers have a lot of influence over the more restrained guys. So there's career criminals that do nothing but drugs and crime, and they have a lot of influence over the other guys who maybe have functional lives outside the gang. And that drives a lot of the violence and crime. And my very limited experience with, say, Hells Angels in New York City, there's a headquarters there, and if you go to the convenience store or any of the bars nearby, they're in there, and you can say like, "Oh, Hell's Angels! Wow, you know, are you from New York?" "No, I actually am from California. I just drove here over the past couple weeks." "Wow, how long does that take?" "Nah, we do it in 5 days, but it's exhausting." And you're small talking with them about something they did, but you're not like, "So did you bring meth with you?" Like, you don't say anything like that, but you just talk, and they're perfectly friendly. They don't like kick you out of the bar or push you off the bar stool. It's almost confusing.
Not every Hells Angels patch that I crossed paths with was a murderer or a rapist or a gun runner or a drug trafficker. There were plenty of them that I crossed paths with that weren't actively, at least actively, involved in criminal activity. When I crossed paths with those people who weren't actively criminal, like I didn't have much interest in them. Like, why? Why? Unless that guy could open a door to someone who was involved in that, like I didn't have time to waste on those guys. One of the positions they take is that in their defense is that we're a club, we're not a gang. Okay, well, there's two different definitions. They actually fit both. We're not an organized, we're not an international organized crime syndicate. Well, they do fit the definitions of that, but one of their statements is that we're not a criminal organization. We're an organization that may have criminals within it. That's probably
kind of like the police.
There's some accuracy to that too.
Right.
But
yeah.
If you're part of an organization and your organization is saturated with criminals, then yes, you are part of a criminal organization.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's
you don't get to like
decision.
Cut the hair on that one. You don't get to split the hair on that one.
Yeah. That's where the lawyers come in and they go, well, we're going to argue this way. And the prosecutor says, well, we're fine. We're going to argue the other way. Although you mentioned in the book something interesting that I'd never heard before, which is often undercover police or law enforcement, they end up sympathizing with the gangs, or they even form their own motorcycle clubs, like cops having a motorcycle club, okay, or gang or something. What's that all about? What's going on there?
Well, I think occasionally there is some Stockholm syndrome that occurs. Like I was very aware of that. I worked hard to avoid that. I woke up every day and reminded myself of who I was, what team I was playing for, and that if these guys figure out who I am, I'm not long for this earth.
Right.
I reminded myself of that. But there is like maybe a sexy, glamorous element to that lifestyle, to the freedom of it. I mean, you walk into a nightclub with a Hells Angels vest on your back, with a Hells Angels patch. Man, in that world, you're a celebrity. I mean, people are stepping out of your way. The Red Sea parts and lets you go to the front of the line. And people are buying you drinks and giving you drugs, and women are throwing themselves at you, not because of who you are, not because you're charming or handsome or whatever those other variables might be. It's because of that patch on your back and the notoriety it brings and the reputation of violence and intimidation it holds.
Right. So that appeals to a certain type of person who then is maybe willing to defend that, I guess, with their life. It doesn't seem worth it to me, but I'm also not the target market for that sort of thing, I suppose.
Well, if you take somebody who is an unknown, is invisible in society, when they put that vest on, like I said earlier, they become a celebrity. And the Hells Angels, unlike any other motorcycle gang, like through their history, have become beyond mythical. They've become part of Americana. They are part of American history, of the history of crime and punishment. And so all those events, all those historical events like the Altamont Motor Speedway event where they were bodyguarding and protecting the Rolling Stones at this massive concert, 1969, 300,000 people in attendance, and they killed a concert goer like in front of all these people. Like events like that, like I was crossing paths with guys who weren't even born in 1969 who were riding that reputation.
Sure. Yeah, and then you get was that just Sons of Anarchy, right? And it's clearly kind of about them / all motorcycle clubs, but they were consultants for them on the show to make it look more realistic. I mean, this whole thing, and people are obsessed with that, right? That show ended years ago. People still talk about it.
I watched it.
Yeah,
I was fascinated by it. Like, where are they doing next? What are they doing next? What, where are these, where are the Sons of Anarchy? Where's Jax Teller going next?
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And Hollywood and television, not just in the motorcycle gang world, but when they're depicting the crime world, be it traditional organized crime or whatever, they portray it in a sexy, glamorous, appealing way. The truth is, when you see behind the scenes, it's not sexy, it's not glamorous. It's a nasty, dirty, bloody, vomit-covered scab of a life. That's the truth of it. But when I realized that very early on, before the Hells Angels case, just when I began to saturate the crime world as an undercover agent, and when I realized it wasn't glamorous, it wasn't sexy, it was nasty and dirty and bloody and dangerous. And when I realized Hollywood has lied to me, Hollywood has created this illusion for me that is not true. When I realized the truth, I loved it. I loved every day. I felt like I had a purpose. I felt like I stood for something. Like my job was to get next to bad people who were doing bad things to good people. When I became an ATF agent, I considered that my highest honor, to be asked to stand up and defend innocent people against the predators.
If you're infiltrating them, don't they try to do the same thing? I mean, look, they don't have an undercover program, but they, their guy's cousin works for the FBI. Are they not like, hey, you got to tell us if you see anything about our club? They must be, surely they're doing that.
Absolutely. And they're very good at infiltrating and saturating all these elements of society, including law enforcement, to gain intelligence. Knowledge is power, but knowledge is power on both sides. It's power for them too. The more they know, the more they know.
Yeah. I got a friend who is Canadian, and he was working for the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, doing something like processing wiretap transcripts. And then one day his boss was like, hey, you are on some of our surveillance because your childhood best friend, his dad is a Hell's Angel or whatever. And you are fired, obviously, because you are the one who is processing the wiretaps of your friend's dad and his associates planning crimes. We cannot trust you with this information anymore. But had he actually been a bad actor instead of a kid with a summer job, he could have probably just said, hey, I can't associate with you guys. They're going to catch you on surveillance. I know you're on surveillance because I'm reading the transcripts. Here's what they say. Here's what they know. Here's what they don't know. I mean, surely they get lucky like that sometimes, or deliberately put people in those positions.
Well, like I was not a part of this investigation, but as an example of what we're talking about, the Tupac Shakur, Biggie Smalls murders, right? Death Row Records had hired off-duty LAPD officers to be a part of their security team. Those LAPD officers were previously Bloods gang members. And so, like, they had insider information. And I can't speak to the details of that. I know in this 30,000-foot view, looking down, historical perspective of that investigation, that was by design.
Mm-hmm.
That was by design.
Yikes, that sounds leaky. It's crazy that cops can come from gangs. It doesn't make a ton of sense. I assume there's a policy about that now, but who knows?
Well, and they're not just involved. Like, let me back up a minute. Because a kid like grows up involved in a gang, does that automatically mean he's not going to be a good policeman?
I think it's the other way around. He's probably going to be a really good street cop because he knows what's going on.
It doesn't. But if you hold on to that gang mentality, and if you hold on to that loyalty now as a lawman or a lawwoman or a member of our military, you know what? Now your loyalty is divided.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a question of loyalty. That's a tough thing to test for. A lot of my friends from law school who wanted to join the FBI, they couldn't do it because they'd smoked weed in college. And I was just thinking, you're going to try to catch the biggest criminals in the country or terrorists, but this guy who's a like certified genius is disqualified because he rolled up a bunch of joints freshman year. Who are you going to hire who's going to understand the mindset of a criminal when you can't even get a pothead past the screening?
Well, those standards in today's world have been loosened a little bit just because of culture and society.
Sure.
Not entirely, but they've been loosened, at least from when I got hired on the job. But like, I was one of those guys. I was one of those guys who got hired who didn't understand the street and had to learn it on the fly to be effective.
You talk about building trust with informants. How do you do that? Actually, you said it's important to build trust, or at least the illusion of trust. Tell me about how you do it, but tell me what you mean by illusion as well.
Well, I think the illusion of trust comes from, our street theater examples of showing them and involving our suspects in crime events and creating an illusion that they ultimately believe to be accurate or true. I think we're talking about two different things to some extent. But when you're dealing with an informant, with a confidential source of information, some who that they have all different motivations. That they're human beings as well. So the first thing is to figure out, like, what is this person's motivation? Are they have they just found like some integrity and they have knowledge of something that they're uncomfortable with and they want to do something about it? Maybe. Are they looking for revenge? Maybe. Are they looking for a payment, a reward? Maybe. There's a lot of different variables, but part of assessing like how much trust you place in a confidential source is identifying what's their motivation to help me.
I suppose, right. So some motivations are stronger than others, right? Like if one guy's like, you're going to go to prison for life for trafficking in weapons and violent crime, that's a pretty strong motivation to help you. But if it's just ego validation, they could maybe get that elsewhere, like by betraying you to the gang.
Well, if someone's trying to work off charges and they're being leveraged into cooperation, okay, that deserves a certain level of confidence or trust. And that's, decided individually versus someone who maybe just morally and ethically is opposed to the world that they live in and wants to do something about it versus the guy who's like, I'm neither one of those people. I just want to get paid. I'm going to help you in return for a paycheck. for a reward. Like there's so many different motivations that someone might have, and that's part of the equation. That's part of the trick, figuring it out.
You mentioned riding the motorcycles with these guys is really hard to do. It's not just, you're not just learning how to ride a motorcycle. You're going really fast and you're in this tight formation. Tell me a little bit about that, because there's rules in the formation too, right? You're not just riding on the highway like a normal.
Well, like I wasn't a motorcycle guy, and so now you're dealing with people who are motorcycle guys. Some of these guys have been riding motorcycles since they could walk. And they ride them in daring ways, and they ride fast and they ride hard. You're riding in formation at times, sometimes 20, 30, 40, 50 people deep, 2 by 2, side by side. You could reach over and touch the handle grip of a motorcycle riding by your side. You're 18 inches behind the wheel in front of you, stacked up all the way down. If you're a master motorcycle rider, you might be comfortable in that. You got to be on your game, but you might be comfortable in that. I wasn't. Like, I was at a point in the investigation when I felt like I had built some trust and some loyalty and some love. I was telling Joe Slatella, I was telling my case agent, these guys aren't going to hurt me. They're not going to kill me. They're going to protect me if we get into a problem. You know how I'm going to die in this case? I'm going to die on this case running my motorcycle into a telephone pole trying to keep up with these dudes.
Yeah, that's terrifying. And you're not allowed to pass, or there's a couple rules, right? You're not allowed to pass someone's front wheel. How does that work?
Yeah,
what's going on there?
These guys ride the equivalent of the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds. Okay. They ride in precision, and they're very, very good at it. One of the first times out, I was riding with the Mesa, Arizona charter, and they were very good at it. They rode in a very tight pack. And I'm at the back of the pack, and the president came up to me and said, "Keep up." And like what he's saying, like, look, if we blow red lights, you better blow the light. Like you better lay off the brakes. Don't embarrass me. Don't be that guy who hits the brake when the light turns red. Blow through. I was white knuckling riding with these guys, at least probably the first half of the investigation. It was a 2-year investigation. Towards the end, I felt pretty confident. I felt like my skills maybe not had caught up to these guys, but like I was competitive. But getting to that point, I was like, man, these guys, like I would get through at the end of the night, like bar hopping with these guys, going from spot to spot. And I would get back to my undercover house and think, like, only by the grace of God was I not killed on that motorcycle tonight.
Wow. Jeez. Yeah, that would be as scarier than dealing with all these people and engaging in undercover work in the first place.
And anybody that's seen a motorcycle accident in real time, firsthand,
oh yeah,
you've seen, like, oh my gosh, they're terrible.
It's messy. Yeah,
terrible.
It's messy. It's just a meat cran, even if you have protective gear on. And that's
terrible.
If you don't smash
the aftermath
yourself
of a bad motorcycle accident is something that once something has been seen, it can never be unseen. You don't want to see it.
First impressions you talk about a lot in the book as well, super important, especially for undercover. How do you make a strong first impression specifically in the criminal underworld? You mentioned never take your guns off for anyone, or there's things like that, but tell us about this.
You know what? I think that very much in the criminal world applies to real world, applies to society. When you treat people respectfully, you can expect or demand to be treated back respectfully. And I tried to do that. I tried to be very human about it. When I shook hands with someone, when I was being introduced to someone, I would take my sunglasses off or lift my sunglasses up so I could look them in the eye. If I had riding gloves on, I would take my glove off and shake hands, fist to fist, skin to skin. Those little elements of displaying respect, and then knowing your place. Like, I was a nobody, man. I was at the bottom of the barrel. I was the last rung on the ladder. So like, I wasn't in a place where I could like jump up and go sit down and put my arm around some shot caller. They'd be looking at me like, dude, punk, who are you, man? Like, I don't know who you are. Like, get away from me. I was respectful of that. I had to earn the ability to speak to people like that. It wasn't inherent. Like, you don't show up. I suppose you could just show up and do that. But I think you would draw suspicion by doing that. Like, this dude's trying too hard. I had to try hard without giving the impression that I was trying too hard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a hell of a lot of sense. You mentioned that real cops don't do drugs unless our lives depend on it. Why? What's up with that rule? It seems like it would be really easy to just do a couple lines of blow here and there. Like, lawyers do it. It's not exactly an advanced kind of thing. Why the prohibition on this?
Well, would it make things easier? 100%. Obviously. It goes back to earlier in our conversation about outrageous government conduct. If ultimately my investigation ends and I am a witness in the witness box and I'm telling a jury and a judge what I experienced, that defense attorney is going to say, you know what, my client that's sitting next to me here is the defendant in this case, and that agent did everything just as bad, was just as nasty as my client. You can't just nonchalantly like violate the law and then expect to not be held accountable for it, and then hide behind a badge or hide behind an undercover persona as your excuse.
I suppose there's also a world in which you say, and then what happened? Are you sure about that? Because you were high out of your mind on methamphetamine during that entire evening. And we know that because you're talking at 120 words per minute on the tapes, and we have you on video doing it. That's probably not a good look either.
If you were doing that, what kind of credibility would you have as a witness?
Yeah, well, I suppose, yeah, depends on the crime. But yeah, it's a tougher argument for sure. Your kid calls at one point while you're in a meeting with the gang. How do you deal with something like that? I'm surprised you answer that. I guess maybe you didn't have caller ID on your cell phone at that time, or you're not sure. It seems like a call you might want to put to voicemail.
You know, my kids were born into their father being an undercover agent. That's all they've ever known. And so we had rules like at my house. We had our own protocols. It's not like you can never, ever see your kids again. You're out in public, you're interacting. One of the rules I had with my kids was the equivalent of a traffic light. If I was with, my daughter or my son, and we were approached by a suspect in a case, like, I would tell them, think like a traffic light. If it's red, just stop. Just stop what you're doing. Hold tight. I will figure this out. If it's yellow, we need to be cautious. We need to be on guard. If it's green, we can just go. And so I would tell them, like, hey, you know what? If I'm holding your hand and we cross paths with someone, yellow light. That means, hey, like we need to be careful now. We need to pay attention. That did happen to me. I was with my daughter at one point, and I crossed paths with one of the suspects in our case, the Hells Angels case. And it was very matter of fact. Hey, who's this? That's my daughter. It was part of my cover story. I built my cover story very close to the truth. But I do remember, telling her, I see this guy approaching, and said, do you remember the traffic light? And she's like, Daddy, I'm not sure I remember it right now. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, we got a yellow light right now. Just be cautious. But then after we separated, I told her, if you ever see that guy again, you run as hard and as fast as you can and don't stop. I will come and find you.
That's a scary person. I'm guessing. That's not a. That's. I mean, for her to just take off and sprint. That's.
Well, as you know, as an undercover agent or officer, you still have a real life.
Yeah.
You still have families and you have backgrounds and you have all those things that any normal, real person has. You don't just completely walk away from that. At least I never did. There may be stories of where people completely left their family, completely left that life behind and never touched it. I think Joe Pistone, I think Donnie Brasco, like at least touched on that to some extent, and that's a guy who's on the Mount Rushmore of undercover work. He's so legendary, but he's still overlapped with his family at times too.
You said when you become a Hell's Angel, everything else about you is now moot. They have a rule book that makes the Division I football playbook look like a pamphlet on buying a jacuzzi. So I'm so curious what kind of rules there are. We mentioned never passing a full patches front wheel or something when you're driving, but what kind of other rules are there? I know there's rules about girlfriends and wives and things like that. Maybe you can give us some examples of the rules, and especially if they're weird. That might be interesting.
There are, and there's pages and pages and pages of typewritten bylaws of things that you can and can't do. One of the things that like stunned me in today's world, and now granted, we're talking about 20 years ago when this investigation was active, but nonetheless, even 20 years ago, like written in the bylaws were no fill in the blank with the most offensive, obscene word you can use to describe a black person.
Okay.
No fill in the blank in the club. That was written down. Wow. It was in their bylaws. And I remember reading that and I was like, man, like I get that like there's this racist element to what we're doing, but like you guys wrote it down and made it part of the bylaws. No blank in the club.
Right. Wow.
I was like, oh, okay. Like, I'm not making these rules.
Right.
And that was, for me, that was to some extent, like not to some extent, to a large extent, that was compromising because I wasn't raised that way. That's not the mentality I had. Like I was an athlete. You're in a locker room. Like I had spent my youth and as a young adult in locker rooms and on sports fields with people of all different colors, all different backgrounds. To say that there's a rule written down that like I cannot associate or be friends with this person now was it was strange. It was unsettling to me.
Yeah. What are some of the weirdest rules that almost don't make any sense until you think about it or until you explain it?
Well, one, like a writing rule, and I can't say for certain that this was written down, but it definitely was impressed on me, was that as a prospect at writing with other members, I could not let my front wheel cross that member's back wheel.
Right. Okay.
Like it was a violation of that delineation of status within the gang. At least not without being invited. If you're riding and you're riding behind someone and you're behind a member and you're being respectful and he waves you up, come on, okay, now I've been invited up. But I couldn't do that on my own. I did one time without knowing the rule. And when we stopped for gas, a member came back and said, next time you do that, when I hit you in the mouth, you'll know why. Yikes,
yeah. Right. You're sort of assuming a higher status that you didn't earn, right? If you do something like that.
There was a time I wore rings on all my fingers. It was part of the glitz of the role. And I had a ring that had the Nazi SS lightning bolts on it. It was a prop. That wasn't my mindset or my mentality.
Yeah, I assume it wasn't part of your police uniform.
It was a prop, right? And so a member of my charter came up and said, "You got to take that ring off. That type of paraphernalia is illegal in Germany. It has been ruled in Germany, you can't display like the SS lightning bolts or a swastika in Germany. So in support of our German brothers, we no longer have that on our vests. We no longer wear that type of paraphernalia. So you need to get rid of that ring. And I was like, okay, lesson learned. Well, a week later, some time passes by and I still hadn't taken that ring off. And the member came up to me and said, remember I told you about that ring? I'm going to tell you one more time to get rid of that ring. I told you why. If I see you again and you're still wearing that ring, I'm going to take your finger off with a tree pruner and I'm taking the ring off. And I did not doubt that he was being serious.
Well, that's how you deal with Nazis anyway. But yeah, I suppose they seemed like they were a little bit more sympathetic to some of the shadier. Are there Jews in the Hells Angels? I thought I was
playing the role. I thought
curious.
I was like, hey man, they're going to love this. This is like, you know, this is the vibe that I'm trying to create. And it was like a violation of, you know, that bylaw, that protocol, that rule, that like I had to learn a lot on the fly.
Sure.
It was not the world that I lived in. I was every day was trying to like get better at it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there Jewish Hells Angels, or is it mostly an atheist kind of organization or Christian organization?
You know what? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to assume that there are. I don't know. I don't.
It's probably not coming up a lot in the meetings. Hey, it's Hanukkah. I can't ride this week.
Well, no. And you know, the thing is regardless of what like your faith level might be, what you might believe in, with the Hells Angels, the religion, the true religion, the only religion is the religion of the Hells Angels. That name, that death head center patch, they have historically bled and died in defense and fighting for that. That is their religion. It's more important than their wives or girlfriends, than their kids, than their jobs, than their house, their income. There's nothing more important to those true believers than that Hells Angels name and that death head logo. And they are very much willing to die for it.
Yeah, that's the, I don't even know if it's the underbelly. It's right on the front. But as much as there's excitement and danger and catching these bad guys, it's the really depressing part in the underbelly of this. You mentioned some of the women that hang around, and I'm going to paraphrase, but you say they'd been rode hard and kind of put away wet, so to speak. And some of them were attractive and other ones looked like I think you said a snowy mud flap in March or something like that. I mean, just, you know, the life hasn't been kind to them. You said there's little kids around who had the same name as your son, and this kid wanted to show you his new toy, and it was like a used tire. And you just think, damn, this kid's life around all these degenerates just sucks.
I found that there's like every element of society is also within that gang. There was affluence. There's people that were wealthy, that had money, that had good jobs, that had nice houses, that had nice cars. All the way down to, like, I had a neighbor that was a Hells Angel that lived near my undercover house that was living in, like, the equivalent of a homemade tent with dirt floors. He would come to my undercover house and his wife, and they would bring their daughter, who was a little girl, probably 6 or 7, 8 years old at the time. They'd come to my house specifically like once every couple of weeks so they could take a shower.
Oh, man.
You know, they'd knock on the door like, hey, Bird, can we come in and use your shower, man? And they were just, it was so sad, man. They were dirty and they didn't have any accommodations. And I'm like, man, of course. Like, what am I going to do? Say, no, you can't come in my house to take a shower? Yeah. You're not going to, I'm not going to let this little girl get cleaned up?
It's so depressing that anybody lives like that, especially children. That's got to be tough to see. And
this was a very well-respected Hells Angel in Arizona, like an old school Hells Angel. And man, he was struggling to survive, you know?
Is he not making money from doing what they do, trafficking things and people and guns and drugs? I mean,
apparently not, or whatever he was making definitely wasn't going to improving their living conditions. I'll tell you that.
Man. Yeah, you mentioned that you said something along the lines of an undercover constantly trades his ethics for the greater good of the case. And I think the example was you wanted to arrest all these degenerates who were doing drugs around their kids and they weren't feeding their kids. But it's like, well, but if I don't arrest them, I can maybe arrest the people who are running, these guys, in charge of these guys, or arrest all of them or more of them. What other kind of trade-offs do you have to make in this line of work?
Well, you know what? It's a constant challenge. I'll give you a story unrelated to the Hells Angels. Let me back up a little bit. The way that question was characterized, it made it sound like every Hells Angel and every family and every kid was being abused. That was not the case. I saw families being treated respectfully and women being treated respectfully. I saw some being treated very much disrespectfully. Typically the women that were being disrespected volunteered themselves into that. They were more than willing to be participants in whatever it was that was going on. There was others that were treated with huge dignity and huge respect. And so I don't want to put them all, from my experience, into one lump. But I'll tell you a case from outside the Hells Angels case. I had bought some bombs from some suspects. And so I meet them at a hotel room, and I go in, and mom and dad are the ones selling the bombs. And there's a little girl that's probably 5 years old sitting right there on the floor of this hotel, terribly dirty floor. She had like one of those onesie pajamas on that's got like the bottoms and the tops all in one piece with the zipper in front. Filthy, watching cartoons. I do this this bomb deal with mom and dad, and I leave with my bombs. And this little girl was like, obviously not a participant in it, but like there was no effort made to remove her from the presence of this explosives transaction. I'm walking back to my car. I've got these bombs, and an ice cream truck is coming down the street. And I put my bombs in the trunk of my car, and I told my partner, like, hey man, hold on a second. We got to do something kind here. So I bought an ice cream cone, and I went back to the hotel room, and the door was slightly ajar, and I pushed the door open. Well, mom and dad likely automatically think I'm coming back to rip them back off for my payment for the bombs. Like pistols come up like instantly on me, and I'm like, man, time out. Easy, man. I got an ice cream cone for your kid. Like I just wanted to bring like a little bit of kindness, a little bit of happiness, like into that kid's life. If it was only for a moment, if it was only for the 5 minutes it took to eat that ice cream cone, I wanted that kid to be treated like a kid for a minute instead of being present and in essence a victim as part of an explosives transaction.
That is horrifying, especially as a parent. You had to just be like, God, man. It's just that kid just drew was dealt a crappy hand of cards to have those parents.
When you project out and you witness something like that, it's not hard to try to imagine, like, what are this kid's chances? Like, could this kid end up like going to medical school and being a brilliant surgeon? Maybe the intelligence could maybe be there. But like, how can that ever happen? How does this kid ever have a chance to escape this?
The best case scenario is they get taken away from the parents when they go to prison or die or something, and they end up in a better home. I mean, that's what else? Even if they are a certified genius, they're probably with influences like that, they're just going to misuse that intelligence and end up in prison or something like that, right?
The opportunity, if they were some type of savant, the opportunity to ever put it on display is next to nothing.
If you're wearing dirty onesie pajamas with your bomb-dealing parents, you're probably not in school, right? No one's paying attention to your education. It's just, what a mess. It's just, that is so sad.
We made pretty quick work of that case, and Child Protective Services came in and intervened. I can't tell you what the result of that was. I can't tell you if the kid was ultimately like taken into protective custody or separated from mom or dad. That was not even my objective. I'm like, any of these cases, from the Hells Angels case to the hundreds of other I worked, it was never personal for me. I never set out to ruin anybody's life. I never set out to like destroy a family. I never said to myself, I'm going to make sure this guy spends the rest of his life in prison. Like, that was not my job. My job was to infiltrate criminals and crime schemes and then gather evidence, gather intelligence, bring that back out, report that to a case agent who would then take it to a prosecutor and then present it into a courtroom. My job wasn't to try to ruin people's lives or make sure that anybody paid whatever the price that justice decided to be paid was. It was never personal for me. I had a job to do. I did it the best I could. People don't like it. People don't like undercover work. They don't like the use of deception, by the police. I get that. No one wants to be betrayed. Any adult, by the time you reach adulthood, you've been betrayed at some point. Like a boyfriend or a girlfriend has broken your heart, or a friend has left you, or for the wrong, whatever. It sucks. It sucks living through that. It's a terrible feeling. I never got any joy from that. I never danced on anybody's grave and said, "Ha ha, I got you." I always when post arrest, when people that I had investigated and when I had the opportunity were like in their lowest moment, I always tried to like display some kindness to them because I didn't get any satisfaction from seeing them broken.
I can't remember who this was on my show. It might have been Kenneth Croak, but I think it was somebody more recent. He had mentioned that. Oh, no, it's actually a UK undercover drugs cop. And he had said something like one of his most horrific moments of his job was there was a guy that he busted for drugs. And the guy at the end was like, "Man, I can't believe it was you. I really thought you were my friend." And this guy was like a loser, right? He wasn't like a drug kingpin. He was just so hurt because he'd never had a real friend in his whole life. He was, terrible parents, terrible upbringing. And this cop had sort of made friends with him. And he said he really just kind of regretted that because...
Jordan, I'll tell you a very similar story. I have a very similar experience. During the Hells Angels investigation, post-arrest, people are in handcuffs now, and they're being processed. And one of the suspects, the interviewer tells him, "Hey, Jaybird Davis, the gun runner, debt collector, hitman, is actually Jay Dobyns, an ATF agent." And the guy says, "I don't believe that. I won't believe it until I hear it come out of his own mouth." So they bring me in, and I'm standing there, and I've got raid gear on now, and I'm like, man, I hate to. I'm not getting any satisfaction from this, but I'm an ATF agent. And he looked at me and he said, "I've known you for 2 years, and that's the first true thing you've ever said to me."
Huh. Wow. Yeah.
I didn't feel good about that.
No,
I didn't
because
feel good about that.
Even though these people are criminals and scumbags, like you're still actually making friends with them. It's just you're
the
just
one
arresting
thing
them afterwards.
That the people that dislike me, dislike what I do for a living, probably don't want to hear and don't understand is that you can never undercover out the human factor. You don't work undercover and then lose your humanity. There's people that you grow to like. You see redeeming qualities in them. There's people that you're investigating and you see them commit a crime, and it's heartbreaking because they're better than that. You've seen them be better than that. I don't get satisfaction. I didn't get satisfaction out of saying, "Haha, I caught you." There was times when my heart was broken because I was like, "Man, you're better than this. Like, you're a better person than this. You can do better."
Man, it all goes back to those people's parents too, right? And their childhood. And you just think like, man, this guy, there's got to be moments where you go, this guy would have been a really special high achiever, but his parents were pieces of crap. And here we are.
There were times when, I'm working undercover and you're saturated in investigation and events occur that lead to someone being incarcerated, sometimes for a long period of time. There was times when I literally felt like God had lost my phone number. Is this what God wants you doing? I had this mentality that I was trying to protect people, and that I was sometimes I convinced myself I was trying to save the world, which I never did, but like I led myself to believe that. But then you see people broken by your action and by your hand and by your interaction. And there was times when I thought like, man, God's lost my phone number, man. I'm not sure that this is what he wants me to be doing.
It's got to be. Well, I have one question, and then I'll shift gears a little bit. You mentioned buying bombs from that couple with the kid. How do you know when you're buying a stack of bombs that those things aren't just going to blow up in the trunk of your car?
Well, I mean, I think that is where maybe the courage element comes in.
Okay.
Like I had probably gotten to a point where my ability to assess risk was not very good. On a separate occasion, I bought a lot of bombs over the course of my career.
Surely they train you to look at the thing and go, maybe I'll pull the detonator out of this thing before I throw it in the back seat.
Well, without like that very precise training, like that in itself could be very dangerous. Oof. Trying to manipulate a device, right? Yeah. Without being a bomb tech,
sure.
Without being a hurt locker guy. But there was one explosives deal that I bought bombs, put them in the trunk of my car, and I delivered them to the bomb squad to process, to properly handle. And I come out of my trunk of my car holding these bombs, and the bomb squad guys are walking towards me with full bomb squad hurt locker suits on,
and you're wearing
and
a
then
pair
they
of
take
Oakleys
them
and a jacket
and put them in the containment vessel, right?
Right.
And they're looking at me like, dude, you know what? Like, you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. I was going to ask how you deliver those. Surely there's a special vehicle, a room, a place. It's like, no, I just parked in the lot and then grabbed them all and walked towards the guys as they're like, whoa,
well, it's
put
one
those things
thing,
down.
if you buy a pipe bomb and it's got a fuse glued in the end of it, okay, like that's, you don't know what's inside of there, but okay. But like I bought bombs that were pretty technical, that had timers on them and different switches and wires and stuff. And I'm like, man, it's going to take someone way smarter than me to figure out how this thing works. This is it. I know this is a bomb. You take it apart because I don't know how.
Yeah, I wanted to, when I was younger, I thought it would be fun to be a bomb tech. But then you think you're disarming bombs. You forget about the fact that those sometimes blow up while you're snooping around. Oof. God. How do you compartmentalize this stuff and keep it away from your home life? There's a spot in the book where I think you're going home and you're playing with your kids in the pool and running the barbecue and talking to your parents. And like the next day, you're hanging out with these murderer guys who are shoveling meth into their noses and they're talking about killing people. How do you keep that toxic sludge of the criminal life out of your family life? Because it's still in your brain when you go home. And how do you wash that off in the shower and just go like play Legos?
Well, that's a good question. It's a fair question. Prior to our interview, we had the conversation. I said, there's nothing that's off limits, right? You can ask me anything you want to ask me.
Yeah.
So I agree that is a fair question. If I don't answer you honestly and transparently, then nothing I've said previous has any credibility. To that question, I failed, and I failed miserably. I put a huge amount of battle damage on my family. I was selfish. I served like my own motivations, my own goals. I made decisions for myself. I not many times considered how they were going to impact my wife or my kids. There's one example. I'd been gone for an extended period of time, and I came home and my wife cut me off and she said, you can't be gone and then walk in this house and talk to me and the kids like we're gangsters, like we're street people. And I tried to defend myself. I said, I'm not a light switch. I can't turn this on and off. I have to be on all the time. People that treat what I do for a living like a hobby end up dead.
Right.
And then her response was, I understand that, but when you come to this house, you better install a dimmer switch and dial that attitude down, because if you can't do that, you're not welcome here. Don't come home. That's, I had worked undercover for so long that persona stopped being what I did and it became who I was. And that's probably my ultimate regret, is that, to answer your question, I was a failure at insulating my wife and my kids from that undercover life. I crashed bad doing that. That's a humiliating statement to make about yourself. Your audience out there, like, I don't know who's going to listen to this, but it's a truthful statement. And if I'm not truthful, then, like I said, everything else I say doesn't have any credibility either.
I think it's important. I think a lot of people are going to really appreciate your honesty here, because it would be really easy to say, oh, you know what? I just come home, I take a shower, and I remember I've got a wife and kids, and then I flip on Netflix. And it's like, well, that's a bunch of BS. And it doesn't do anybody. There's definitely undercover and other law enforcement listening right now who are thinking, oh, I'm really almost glad to hear this, because it means that I'm not the only one who's screwing up my home life or maybe dancing a little bit too close with the devil.
My son was, I don't know, he was probably 8 or 10 years old at the time. And, I would come home from these operations and I would do the bare minimum I had to do to keep my family functioning. I'd pay the bills, mow the grass, pat the kids on the head, have a cup of coffee with my wife. I didn't want to be at home. I didn't want to be with my family. I wanted to be out smoking and joking with gangsters because I felt like I was changing the world. And so every time I'd leave, my son would run out in the yard and say, like, Dad, don't go yet. And he'd give me a rock. He'd put a little stone out of the yard. For years, I'd collected these stones, and I kept one in my back pocket all the time. I had them in my undercover car, the saddlebags, my motorcycle, my undercover house. I was handing them out to my task force partners, saying, like, I don't know what kind of blessing Jackie's putting on these rocks, but we're thriving and surviving amidst all this murder and violence. Like, these good luck charms are special. So one of the last operations, same routine. I'm getting ready to leave. Jackie goes through the same routine. Dad, don't leave yet. And he brings me this rock. And he's like, I've been saving this one for you. It's special. It's shaped like a heart. And hearts mean love. And so I'm a 40-year-old father. I'm trying to comfort my son. And I said, you know what? All those things that I haven't been doing, I'm almost done. Like, we're going to play catch and we're going to ride bikes and we're going to wrestle and go to the movies and swim. And I'm almost done. And it's all because of your rocks. It's all because of these good luck charms. These things work so good. I've been handing them out to all my partners. And my little boy's in the driveway and he starts crying and tears are coming down his cheeks. And he said, Dad, those weren't for good luck and you shouldn't have given them to anybody else. They were just for you. And my brain stopped. For years, I thought he'd been giving me good luck charms. And he's like, that was for you to put in your pocket. And every time someone's going to hurt you, you could put your hand in there and touch that rock. And that's like me being there to help you fight back against them. That's what I had done to my family in exchange for trying to be Donnie Brasco Part 2 and some superhero, right? I completely failed my family. And so I'm ashamed of that. I'm humiliated by that.
Wow. That's even I need to regain a little bit of my composure hearing that, because of course I'm imagining my own kids who are young right now as well.
You know what? When I would leave, that's what he was thinking. That's what was in my boy's mind. Like, I never thought about that. I just wanted to go work and go change the world, right? And go be amazing and put my dent in the universe. I never thought that this little boy was worried that his dad was going to get hurt and he wasn't going to be there to help him or do anything about it. Never thought that.
Yeah, it must have been a real kind of sobering realization that your son realized your life was in danger. You probably assumed he didn't really get it, but he did.
I will say this, of all this and of all these stories we told, the best thing that has come to me is, like, I've become more spiritual. And God didn't lose my phone number. I'll say this in relation to that last story. I've made a million mistakes in my life. I've done a million things wrong that I regret, that I'm ashamed of. But between God and my wife and my kids, they've given me 1,000,001 second chances to try to recover from it. And that's truly been my blessing.
Man, I have so many more notes, but I kind of that was such a perfect place I think, to put this down. I would love to have you back on. We barely talked about the actual Hells Angels undercover operation. I have a ton of notes. I would love to have you back on at some point.
Anytime. It's been an honor to speak to you and to communicate with your audience. Thank you.
Thank you for checking out this entire episode on YouTube. If you want to follow up on this topic, check out our podcast feed or visit us on our website at jordanharbinger.com, where you can learn more about our guest and dive even deeper into what we discussed today. And remember, YouTube only has about a quarter of the episodes that we release here on the Jordan Harbinger Show audio feed. Any podcast app should have us. Check out the links in the description where you'll find access to all of our shows that don't appear on YouTube, such as Skeptical Sunday, where we debunk topics like crystal healing, GMOs, conspiracy theories, homeopathy, tipping, and even lawns to find out if they're backed by science and or logic. Also, our Feedback Friday episodes where we help people escape from cults, get raises at work, and take all manner of questions from you, the audience, and some of that stuff is dicey. Every episode of the Jordan Harbinger Show has something useful that you can take away and apply in your own life and help you navigate what I know can often seem like the overwhelming and paralyzing challenges of modern life. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.